what is important is to have that one word or that one concept that you can always fall back with your teams. As soon as you see them sliding back to the status quo, you can point that out. And that's kind of like an easy way from day one, starting to explain the concepts and starting pointing out like, look, maybe we're going back to the same ways of working, and it's an easy way to being back on track, if you will. So that's kind of how I see it.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Luciana Toda to the show. Now, I've known Luciana for several years. We've crossed paths at some conferences and just have interacted over the years, talking all things about lean and continuous improvement. And so today she came onto the show and we talked about one of my favorite topics, and that is the second law of thermodynamics, namely entropy. And we talk about the role entropy plays within a lean system, or really any system, not just a lean system, but any system. And we talk about its role and how it is constantly pulling on our systems and trying to really create havoc and disorder. And so this really brought us into the whole, how do you sustain improvements? How do you keep things from backsliding and all that? So a really interesting conversation about maybe some pitfalls to look out for and even some best practices. So I think you're going to enjoy the show. It was a lot of fun to record. And show notes for this episode will be over at gembapodcast.com. This is episode 361. So again, gembapodcast.com, look for episode 361. Okay, enough from me. Let's get to the show. Luciana, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Ron. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, you're welcome. Where are you calling in from today?
Yeah, I'm calling from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'll tell you, it's a cloudy day, so not a beautiful day, but cannot complain.
Right. Okay, well, good. It's cloudy here in Texas as well. Maybe it's cloudy everywhere. I don't know. So, well, listen, we've known each other for a while. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. I miss seeing everybody over at conferences and all the rest of it, and I think that's probably where we got to spend most time chatting was at different conferences and what was it, AME and maybe Catacon. Well, I think you were at Catacon as well, but yeah, it's great to have you on the podcast. So I know you listen to the podcast, or at least you've listened to a few episodes, or maybe all of them. I don't know. But we like to begin.
Almost every single one.
Yes, I know. Thank you so much for that. We like to begin with a quote, as you know. So do you have one?
Yes, I do. So one of the quotes here that is probably some of our guests already mentioned, but I don't think it's ever too much. So people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And one of the reasons that really resonate with me is that there are so many ways that you can really show people that you care. And I want to bring one of story here that happened to me. So back in the day, when I was trying to get into the lean, there was this lady that worked in the company that I work right now. That she was in my mind very powerful, and she was the head of the lean department, if you will, right? So I want to give her a call and say, look, I want to be part of this. And long story short, she wouldn't answer my emails as fast as I wish. She actually had to postpone our meeting a few times. And needless to say, I was a little irritated about it. And then when we finally were able to have that first meeting, the first conversation, the first thing that she told me, she was like, Luciana, I apologize, but I'm actually going to need to postpone our meeting. And I was mad, and then right away she said, look, there's some personal things happening in my life. This is what is happening. And I want to make sure that when we have this conversation, I'm 100% present here. And for the first time, I saw her as a person. For the first time, I saw her as as an equal, or I don't even know how to explain, but
Yeah.
she showed me a part of her, like she was vulnerable right there, that at that point, she built a level of trust with me that to this day, I know that if I have any problem or if I would need to, like she's not my boss anymore, she had moved on to greater things in life, but I knew at that point that working for her would be great, because I knew that if I would ever had a family issue or anything happening personally, she would understand, right? So that was a great way to show people that you care. She was vulnerable. So
Yeah.
it was just a good lesson for me.
It's so interesting that you brought that up. Today I was doing a kind of a kickoff meeting with a new Gemba Academy customer, and we had a bunch of people on this kind of Zoom call sort of thing. And one of the questions from a young lady, she had been through a lot of our training already, and she was talking about, in one of our courses, Culture of Kaizen, we talk about the difference between ethos, logos, and pathos. And she said, she was kind of an accountant by training. So she's like into numbers and graphs. And she says, I'm really good at logos. And, even ethos, which was sort of like your credibility and all that, she's like, I feel good about that too. It's not an issue. She said, it's this pathos, this one where we talk about emotions and experiences and even suffering. Sometimes this is the Greek word pathos can mean suffering, but it's really this empathy and these emotions, and it's so hard sometimes to show pathos or to practice pathos. And kind of what you did to describe to me was a great example of, eventually there was an experience and this emotion that came out of it, and it can be very powerful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good.
It's a great example as well.
So Luciana, I know about your background and where you work and all that, but why don't you tell everybody that's listening, tell us a little bit about how you first got involved in all this continuous improvement activity, and maybe tell us a little bit about what you're up to these days.
Oh, absolutely. So, oh my gosh. So I'm actually an agronomist by training. So, work in the field, all the corn stuff, all that.
Yeah.
And in my first job, I used to lead a team of people. And it's very interesting because what we did there was very much, if you can compare that as a corn manufacturer, if you will, because you plant, you pollinate, you harvest, and you move on, and then you plant again. So there's the cycles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, I always thought that I was a good person. I thought, at least, I always thought that I was always improving I was always improving my process, but cycle after cycle, things never got better, and I didn't understand why. And that's when Lean appeared in my life, and all of a sudden, everything made sense. I understood that I didn't know the voice of my customer. I didn't know how the change that I was making in my process was actually creating more bottlenecks. And from that point on, I just saw Lean fitting agriculture perfectly. And from that point on, there's no turning back. And oh gosh, that was about, I don't know, like 2015, I want to say.
Yeah. So
that's kind of like how I got into Lean. And what I'm doing nowadays, well, I should work for the same company. It's called Syngenta. It's a biotech agriculture company, and I'm located in Raleigh, North Carolina. So, yeah.
Great. Well, listen, I'm excited for the topic today because, it's a topic that, we talk about a little bit in some Gemba Academy videos, and maybe you saw some of that as well. But the topic is the second law of thermodynamics, and its name is entropy, and it's something that is very important for lean thinkers to understand, to recognize, and ultimately to battle. we are at battle with entropy, right? Because entropy is disorder. It's trying to pull our systems apart constantly. And so I want you to tell me a little bit more in your own words. What is entropy and how is it correlated to what we're trying to do with lean?
Yeah, absolutely. And Ron, I'm shamelessly stealing this for you because that was the first time that I heard about this concept.
Oh,
but,
okay.
Yeah, and we don't need to get into the whole physics of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I want to say is that the way that I look into this whole thing is that if, let's say if you put ice in your coffee,
mm-hmm.
at some point the ice is going to melt and the coffee is going to get colder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if there's no intervention that's done to the ice stop melting, etc., the temperature will get to equilibrium at some point, mm-hmm. right? And the same thing happened in a sustained phase of a project. If there's no hard work, you won't be able to sustain the change because the process, your ways of work, it's so ingrained, and that is like entropy. Like you're always you're always fighting back, so it doesn't go back to the old ways of work. It doesn't go back to that equilibrium, right? Mm-hmm. And the funny thing here is that, some people hate when I say entropy, but at the end of the day, whether you want to call that concept entropy or fighting the status quo, at the end of the day, I personally don't care whatever word you use.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I always tell people is that what is important is to have that one word or that one concept that you can always fall back with your teams. As soon as you see them sliding back to the status quo, you can point that out. And that's kind of like an easy way from day one, starting to explain the concepts and starting pointing out like, look, maybe we're going back to the same ways of working, and it's an easy way to turn being back on track, if you will. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I love it. So let's keep going a little bit. Give me some examples of what you think we should be doing as lean thinkers, even at the beginning of these continuous improvement journeys. Maybe with some people, it's their first time learning about all of these concepts. Like, what can we be doing to better set ourselves up for success?
Yeah, and there's lots of things we can do, right? But I actually want to talk a little. Well, before I give example, I want to talk a little bit about this whole concept, because a lot of time in a lot of lean initiatives, it always starts with that 5S, right? Let's start cleaning everything. And a lot of times there's not a reasonable reason why we're starting with 5S. Mm-hmm. And therefore, a lot of times we ended up stopping at the 3S or 4S, if you will.
Yeah.
If you want to start a lean initiative, people need to start asking the question, like, what problem you're trying to resolve, right? So let's say if the problem they're trying to resolve is a safer place to work, or if they say, like, I need to make my value flow better in the system, maybe you can start with 5S. But unless people understand what problem you're trying to address, you're never going to be able to sustain whatever change you have done there, right? Because you basically have given them the fish and not teaching them how to fish, right? So I start with a little bit of intro before I give example, because this is actually something that happened in one of the teams that we were working. We were working with a team that, we did start with the 5S, but the reason here is that they want to improve HSC, they want to improve productivity, and the overall employee morale. Okay. And going back to the concept of working with sustainability at day one, when we start with the 5S, we actually flip the roles with the leadership. We actually ask the leadership to come to the shop floor and actually and actually do the work, clean the warehouse in the dust, in the hot, in the heat, in the dirty workplace. And we actually invited the crew members to the nice conference room, and we started teaching them about about 5 whys. And the idea here was really like empowerment of the ground crew. So we want to equip them to solve their own problem, while we also want to humble the leadership to be able to actually do the hard work. And what, well, there's many reasons we ended up doing this way, right? But the key thing here is that once people understood why we're using 5S, why we're using the different tools, most likely we would be able to sustain that knowledge, because after the leaders spending hours cleaning the warehouse, they were much more inclined to be able to sustain that. Mm-hmm. They were much more inclined to say, yeah, like the value is not flowing in this area here because X, Y, and Z. They were more inclined to evaluate the work. And for the ground crew, they felt that, okay, if I can structure my problem solving in this way, it's much easier for me to bring my ideas up to the leadership. It's much easier for me to test it out countermeasurement, right? So they felt empowered. And with that, it was something that helped us being able to start like sustaining the change right away, if you will.
Yeah. From the very beginning, you're thinking about, it's almost like beginning with the end in mind, right? You already know where you want to be. And so you're setting that up from the very beginning.
Exactly. And if I can even mention like one more thing here that we have done that help with the sustainability or fighting the entropy. And this is like something that I learned from a good friend of mine, Marcelo de Almeida. So he said, like, Luciana, one of the key reasons you're doing the 5S is actually to improve HSC. So instead of like the leadership leading, or instead of you leading this with the leadership, why don't you invite the HSC manager to co-lead this whole thing with you? Because at the end of the day, right, like you need to be going through the 5 different assets with that safety in mind, right? Like with that in mind. So that actually worked really well.
I love it. What was the initial response of the HEC manager when you asked them to co-lead with you? Were they hesitant? Were they excited? What was the reaction?
So we use this approach with some different sites that we worked. It's a mix and match, but oftentimes they're not as excited because 5S, it's a tool that it's widely used, but it's in a lot of places that we were going. They already have tried that before and have failed, right? So at first they were very hesitant, but again, like I do think that using that approach of explaining, teaching why you're using the tool and being able like to flip some of the roles, right? So with the whole concept of having the end in mind, it helped the HSC like understand why we're doing, and it didn't work it out well, but they weren't too happy at the beginning.
That's great. You always start with why, right? Why are we doing this? Yeah, beautiful. So let's talk a little bit more. Let's keep going on sustainability. I'm wondering if you can maybe share what you've seen, maybe some mistakes that folks are making that makes sustainability more difficult. What should we be avoiding?
So many things. Like we can start putting a list together here, but usually like anything in my mind that is too short term, it's usually a pitfall. They're working for entropy and against sustainability. So short term journey, like short-term vision, if you will, that has a short-term goal in mind. Like, for instance, let's train X amount of people by the end of whatever year.
Mm-hmm.
Let's save X amount of dollar by the end of whatever, all those things that it's very short-minded. I think it's usually a pitfall,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because again, like you don't live by, you're just looking for now and not the sustaining portion, right?
Yeah.
And wrong, like I'm not trying here to kid ourselves, right? Because majority of us, we work for profit organization where saving,
Mm-hmm.
productivity are important metrics. So I'm not saying that, those metrics are important. However, people can smell when something is not authentic miles away,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're trying to sell that idea that you're deploying Lean because you want to shift the way to work, but your only emphasis is the praising for the amount of dollar saving,
Yeah.
amount of people trained, right?
Mm-hmm.
No one's going to believe in your vision, right? So that's one of the things that I think like it's a pitfall or something we see often.
Exactly. So I know we were talking before we started recording. I know you're a big Simon Sinek fan, so he teaches a concept as well called infinite games. Do you want to? What's that all about?
Oh yeah, I love that you mentioned this because that's also like part of the reason. I was talking about having that too, short-term goal,
Mm-hmm.
that short-term mind short-term vision in mind, it's usually a pitfall, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love that book from Simon Sinek because he does introduce that concept about infinite games. And I know we already talked about a quote here, but I need to, if I may, read his quote here.
You may, yes.
So, in infinite games like football or chess, the players are known, the rules are fixed, and the endpoint is clear. In infinite games like business or politics or life itself, there's no defined endpoint. And that's something important, right? Because when you're truly like trying to deploy a Lean journey, there's no winners and losers, right? There's not a end game in mind. So what happened after I save extra amount of money? What happened after I say I train X amount of people, right? If there's not a actual, if there's nothing beyond that,
yeah,
you haven't done a Lean transformation. You haven't changed the ways of working, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I love it. I mean, it's like, we talk about continuous improvement. Sometimes I think we say the words, but don't realize what they mean. What does continuous means? It means it never ends, right? And so, I also reminds me, Luciana, of when we talk about, focusing on the process, right? The process, instead of the result. Because if you're focused relentlessly on improving the process, the results will come. The results are the output, right, of those inputs, which are the process, the variables in the process. So, just relentlessly pursuing perfection even within the process is going to, obviously you'll never be perfect. So that's why you're always in pursuit of it. But this is going to help us, I believe, with what you're saying in sustainability, because in the end, I always say, and I know you've heard me say it, that we really can't ever sustain anything. Or like when we're talking about DMAIC, in Six Sigma, we talk about control, in that last phase. I hate that name, control, because you can't control anything. It's either getting a little bit better or it's getting a little bit worse. It's your choice. right? And so really, if I had to write DMAIC over again, I would say, even in our training, we say it. You say, yes, maybe some probably call it control, but I call it continuously improve, right? Just make it a little bit better every day. And then you don't have to worry about it backsliding because it's always getting a little bit better. Is that what you think?
Yeah. And you explained so much better than I did. It like that control thing, the control phase, I agree with you. If we could just change that, oh my gosh, it would make so much sense.
Yeah. Well, even when some people will call control charts process behavior charts, I actually think that's a great term. I mean, I still call them control charts. I'm too old school, I guess. But calling them process behavior charts is another wonderful way to look at those, because all we're really doing is we're studying a process and trying to understand, how is it acting? How is it behaving? Is it common cause variation, special cause variation, whatever it might be? But in the end, again, there's control limits, if you will, on there, just helping us understand what kind of variation. But yeah, in the end, controlling is it's really for fools. You can't control anything. You can only make it better, or it's getting worse. So.
Yep. I agree completely.
What about so those are some pitfalls to avoid, but what about some best practices on the flip side of it? What are some of your ideas there?
Yeah. And oh my gosh, I'm going to need to bring another book here. So there's a book that I absolutely love. It's called Leading Change by John Cotta. And he not only described 8 stages to follow to lead change, he also gives some practical ways to achieve that. And, I'm not going to go into details because, obviously we can link the book right here, or people can read, right?
Yeah.
But I want to mention some of the stage that I do think is a very much, it is best practice. In a nutshell, right? So he started talking about establishing a sense of urgency. It got to be important for leadership. He talks about communicating the changed vision, empowering people, and all that. But there's one of the step that it's empowered, broad-based action. And this particular one talks a lot about the education portion, the training, which of course is important. But it doesn't mean that, but one important thing is that it doesn't mean that you need to spend time only in the training portion. Training is just one level of the education. And one of the things that I feel like when we go to, we just follow step by step a methodology, we ended up forgetting because what John Cotta actually is inferring here, it's more of training with the coaching, right? In one of the things I feel we need to do more in this community is that focusing in the coaching. There are so many great training out there, including yours, yours included.
Thank you.
That there's so many videos out there.
Yeah.
But so you can teach people, you can teach people with so many diverse training out there.
Yeah.
What you cannot substitute is that real coaching, right? Is that the hands-on coaching that will allow you to go from what you have just learned to the practice, to the actual hands-on experience, right?
Yes.
And so I don't know, that's in terms of best practice, it's hard to replicate, right, Ron? But it's one of the things that when people say oh, I want to do this Lean thing, it's all about that coaching piece.
Yeah,
all
I love it.
Asking the right questions. I
couldn't agree more. I mean, even again, the Academy, we're constantly preaching that, we've got a lot of videos. We have a lot and they're important. You do need to have the knowledge. People have to learn the basic concepts here. But in the end, it's coaching partnered closely with practice or deliberate practice, right? Taking these things that you're learning, whether it's in a video or a book or in-person class. It doesn't matter. You get the information in your head, hopefully as quickly and with least amount of waste possible, right? And then you get on with practicing, deliberate practice with a coach. And you really need a coach in order to deliberately practice something. Because that's the kind of the big mistake I think Malcolm Gladwell made in his book Outliers. When he introduced the 10,000 hour rule, I mean, he stole it from, Kay Anders Erickson from Florida State. He's the original deliberate practice guy, right? But Gladwell got it wrong, and he misled a lot of people when he said, oh, you just got to go do something for 10,000 hours and you'll be an expert. Well, I can just pick up a guitar and start strumming it for 10,000 hours, and I'm still not going to be able to play the guitar after 10,000 hours of strumming it randomly. Sure, I might accidentally stumble into a few things, but it's not until I have a coach who's teaching me, hey, Ron, put your fingers this way. That's this chord. Put your fingers that way. That's that chord. Strum it this way. So now I'm practicing deliberately, right? And then that is when improvement is going to occur. But it can't just be random practice, right? You need some guide to help you along the way. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
And one thing that's interesting here is that like some people are also very married to that idea that it gotta be a link coach. Right. Or it gotta be like somebody that have done a certification and all this and all that. But at the end of the day, like sometimes a lot of those things is more about asking the right question. The whole thing that we talked before that, you need to teach somebody to fish and not to give them the fish.
Yeah.
It's more about being able to ask the questions, lead people to the right direction than just like, how many certification you have, how many belts you have, how many books you have read and all that. So I recently got the Flow System by Nigel Trullo.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I want to bring here is like, I don't know, like best practice or book recommendation or something, whatever you want to call, is that one of the things that I hear often is that Lean, it's something that was done in Japan back in the day. It's nowadays we have a different system. Things are too complex. Those things doesn't apply for modern, the more modern world per se, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because, as you know, of course, applies, right? The things having the same concepts apply, but this book really presents like a more modern version, sustainable for this complexity that we have nowadays, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it provides some like answers, like how we maximize volume for the customers in the new system, like that is so complex. So nowadays we have AI. Mm-hmm. And we have automation, and we have all those other things that it's technically making the flow runs better through the process. But again, like the same concepts apply. And I just want to mention this because it opened me a new way of like looking to complexity, system thinking, and how we actually tied back into the old concepts of Lean.
Yeah, I love it. Fantastic. Luciana, this has been fun talking about entropy. I like it. So maybe let's wrap things up. I don't know if you have any final words of wisdom or maybe some advice that you want to leave with everybody. And then I definitely want you to tell people how they can connect with you over social media or any other way.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. And I'm not sure if it's a word of wisdom here per se, but when I started working with Lean, so as I mentioned before, I'm an agronomist by training, and there's not a whole lot of information of Lean in agriculture. Although there's a lot of people that is currently using Lean in agriculture, there's not like a book. Right, like a book or something. And when I started my journey, I felt like, I just don't have enough information out there to learn from others. And one of the things I want to mention here is that the concepts apply for no matter industry, as you talk here many times. But the fact that one of the things that I've done, it was just like, well, I cannot find a book in land in agriculture, but I'm going to read all the other literature out there. I'm going to try to network with all these other, whoever people would talk to me. And that was a very good learning, because it was up to me to be able to translate those concepts into my industry. It was up to me to try to understand like how it apply in different systems. And all the information is out there. We just need to go seek, you know?
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. Well, what's the best way for folks to connect with you?
Oh, yeah. I guess LinkedIn would be the best way.
Okay.
So it's Luciana Toda. I can spell that. Do you want me to spell that out?
Well, yeah, we'll put it in the show notes as well. So we'll link to it there in the show notes. So folks, but yeah, go ahead and spell it if you'd like. It's fine.
Yeah. So it's just Luciana, last name Toda, Toda. And also, like, if anybody want to connect with me via email, in case you don't have LinkedIn, it's my first and last name, Luciana Toda @hotmail.com. So
got it.
Easy peasy.
Easy. All right. Well, thank you so much for Luciana for coming on. It's been fun talking about this topic. I loved the topic, obviously. So great job. And maybe we'll have you on again down the road. We'll talk about something else. How's that sound?
Oh, absolutely. I was up for that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Whether you've been on the continuous improvement journey for many years, or perhaps you're just getting started, Gemba Academy is here to support you. And while we're best known for our more than 1,500 Lean and Six Sigma teaching and virtual tour videos, we also have a team of experienced Lean and Six Sigma practitioners available for one-on-one coaching, as well as a variety of Lean and Six Sigma certification options. To learn more and to schedule a demo, head on over to gembaacademy.com.